I poured myself a second cup of coffee, read the message on my phone one more time, and then set the phone face down on the kitchen table. My name is Howard Calloway, and I am 63 years old, and the morning my daughter told me I was on my own, I decided she was absolutely right. Let me tell you how we got there. I spent 31 years working as a structural engineer for a firm in Calgary. Not glamorous work, not the kind of thing people ask about at dinner parties, but honest work. I designed the bones of buildings. I made sure things held up under pressure. There is a certain irony in that. Looking back now, my wife Catherine passed away 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I will not spend long on that part because it still sits in my chest like something that never fully healed. And this is not that story. What I will say is that after she was gone, I poured everything I had left into our daughter Brooke. She was 24 when her mother died, old enough to manage, but young enough to still need her father, or so I believed. I was probably the one who needed her, if I am being honest. I helped her buy her first condo in Edmonton. Not a gift, a loan, we said, though we both understood that word loosely. $42,000, I helped her move in on a cold Saturday in February. Her boyfriend at the time carrying boxes while I assembled flat-pack furniture on my knees on a laminate floor. She made us grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, and we watched a movie on her laptop because the television wasn't set up yet, and I drove home at 11 at night feeling like I'd done something right. That boyfriend became a fiancé, then a husband. His name is Ryan. He works in oil and gas, makes good money, has the kind of confidence that fills a room before he does. I tried to like him. I did for a while. He called me Howard instead of Mr. Calloway, which I told myself was just the way of his generation. He had opinions about everything and shared them without being asked. He thought my house in Cochrane was too big for one person, that I should downsize, free up some equity, live a little. He said this at Christmas dinner 2 years into their marriage, while I was still paying off the loan I had taken to help them renovate their kitchen. I did not say anything at the time. I should have said something at the time. Brooke changed slowly, the way water changes a riverbank. You don't see it happening, and then one day the whole shape is different. She stopped calling on weekdays. Then the weekend calls got shorter. Then there were stretches of 2 or 3 weeks where I would send a text and get back a string of emojis and nothing else. I told myself they were busy. They bought a house in St. Albert. Then they had my granddaughter, Lily. Then a second child, a boy they named Connor. I drove 4 hours each way to be there when both of them were born. I sat in waiting room chairs, holding terrible coffee, and I cried in my truck in the parking garage both times, alone, happy and aching in equal measure, wishing Catherine could have seen them. I was a good grandfather. I need to say that clearly because it matters to what comes later. I babysat every time they asked. I drove up from Cochrane on long weekends. I bought a portable crib to keep at my house for when they visited, which became less and less frequent. I fixed their fence one August, replaced the water heater in their basement the following spring. Not because they asked, though they did ask, but because I wanted to be useful. I wanted to matter to them. I think that is where I went wrong. Not the wanting, but the way I never let them feel the cost of what I gave. The message came on a Tuesday evening in October. I had just gotten in from a walk. The leaves were down early that year, all of it brown and flattened against the sidewalk, and the air had that first hard bite of winter coming. I was making soup from a recipe Catherine used to make, chicken and wild rice, and my phone was on the counter. The message was from Brooke. It was long. That was the first thing that struck me, the length of it. When people take the time to write something long, they have been thinking about it for a while. They have rehearsed it. This was not a spontaneous thing. She wrote that she and Ryan had been talking. She wrote that they felt I had certain expectations of them that were becoming a burden. that I visited too often without enough notice, that I had a way of making them feel guilty when they were busy, that they loved me but they needed me to understand that they had their own family now, their own life, and they could not be responsible for my emotional well-being. She wrote that when I got older, if I needed care, they would not be in a position to provide it. She suggested I look into retirement planning services and perhaps a long-term care facility for down the road. She said she hoped I understood this came from a place of honesty and that she did not want there to be any awkwardness between us. I read it twice. The soup was starting to stick to the bottom of the pot. I turned off the burner. I stood there in my kitchen in Cochrane, in the house where I had lived for 26 years, in the house where Brooke had grown up, in the house where her mother had died, in the bedroom down the hall. And I read the message a third time. Then I put on my coat, walked out to my truck, and drove to the Tim Hortons on the main road. I ordered a medium coffee and sat in a corner booth, and I thought for a very long time. An older man at the next table was reading a newspaper. A young mother was helping a toddler with a muffin. Nobody looked at me. I was just a man in his 60s with a coffee going cold in front of him. I drove home. I slept surprisingly well, and in the morning I called my financial advisor. Her name is Janet Ford, and she has handled my accounts for 9 years, and she does not waste words. I told her what had happened. I told her what I had decided. There was a pause on her end, and then she said, "Howard, I think we should meet in person." We met 2 days later. I sat across from her desk and I laid it out. I wanted to review every place where my money touched my daughter's life, every account, every arrangement, every informal understanding that had accumulated over the years the way dust accumulates, invisible until you look directly at it. The list took longer to compile than I expected. The $42,000 for the condo, the kitchen renovation contribution. I had called it a loan, but there was nothing in writing, and we both knew it. The registered education savings plans I had been contributing to for Lily and Connor, $200 a month each, automatic transfer, the family cell phone plan I still paid for, a relic from when Brooke was in university that had simply never been changed. The Amazon Prime account, a small monthly e-transfer I had been sending without remark for the past year and a half after Ryan mentioned they were stretched thin following the second maternity leave. Janet went through it methodically, the way she goes through everything. She did not editorialize. She printed a summary and slid it across the desk to me. I looked at the numbers for a moment. "Cancel the automatic transfers to the RSPs," I said. "Close the shared plan. Stop the monthly transfer. And I want to update my will." Janet looked at me steadily. "Are you sure about the RSPs? The grandchildren?" "I'll open new accounts," I said. "In trust, with conditions they can access when they turn 25, administered through my estate. The money is still for Lily and Connor, but it goes through me, not through their parents." She nodded slowly. She understood. The money was never the point. The money had never been the point. I called my lawyer the following week. His name is Don Abernethy, has been my lawyer since I bought the house, and he is a precise, unhurried man who speaks in complete sentences and never appears rushed. I walked him through what I wanted, a new will. The house to go to a combination of a local land trust and my nephew David, who is a decent young man living in Lethbridge who has never once asked me for anything. The liquid assets to be divided between a conservation fund Catherine had cared about and the Respect Trust for the grandchildren. A charitable gift receipt to be sent to Brooke and Ryan's address so that they would know, clearly and without ambiguity, that the estate had been redirected. Dom asked me once if I had considered mediation. I said I had considered it and decided against it. He accepted this and kept writing. I did not tell Brooke any of this. I did not send a long message in return. I responded to her message after 4 days of silence with 11 words. I said, "I appreciate your honesty. I'll make sure not to be a burden." Then I put the phone down and went back to the wild rice soup I had finally gotten around to finishing. The silence that followed was 6 weeks long. In those 6 weeks, I did several things. I called David, my nephew, and told him I was updating my will and that he should expect to hear from Don Abernethy's office. David got quiet on the phone. He said, "Uncle Howard, you don't have to." And I said, "I know I don't have to. That's the point." He asked if I was all right. I said I was better than I had been in a while, which was true. I booked a trip, 10 days in Newfoundland, somewhere I had always meant to go with Catherine and never had. I booked a small inn in Trinity Bay, rented a car, made no fixed plans beyond the first night. I walked along headlands in the wind with my hands in my jacket pockets, and I watched the North Atlantic do what it has always done, which is move without asking anyone's permission. I ate cod at a table by myself and felt, for the first time in a long time, like a person with his own life. It was a strange and clarifying sensation. I came home from Newfoundland on a Sunday. There was a voicemail from Brooke. She said she had been trying to reach me. She said the kids had been asking about me. Her voice had a quality I had not heard in it in some time, uncertain, reaching. I listened to the voicemail twice, and then I called her back the following morning at a time I knew Ryan would be at work. She answered on the second ring. I did not mention the message. I asked about Lily and Connor. She told me about Connor's ear infection, about Lily starting skating lessons. Her voice was careful at first, then gradually less so. Near the end of the call she said, "Dad, I'm sorry about what I sent. Ryan and I had been arguing a lot, and I think Brooke," I said, "I'm not angry." She was quiet. "But I want you to understand something," I said. "I spent a long time trying to be needed. And what I've learned is that being needed and being loved are not the same thing. I don't want to be needed. I want to be chosen. And if that's not something that's available, I can live with that. But I will not keep arranging my life to prevent you from having to feel uncomfortable." She started crying. Quietly, the way she has cried since she was a child, trying not to let you hear it. I let the silence sit. I did not rush to fill it with reassurance. "I cancelled the automatic transfers to the kids' RSPs," I said calmly. "I want you to know the money isn't gone. I've made other arrangements for them, good arrangements. But things have changed, and I think we should both understand that clearly." She started, then stopped. "What other arrangements?" "That's something we can talk about when we're in the same room," I said. "I was thinking I'd drive up on the 23rd, if that works." Another silence. Longer this time. "That works," she said. I drove up on the 23rd. It was the first Saturday after the first real snowfall of the year, and the highway was clear, but the fields on either side were white and flat all the way to the horizon. I stopped for gas in Olds and stood beside my truck in the cold for a moment, before getting back in, just to feel the air. Ryan was home when I arrived. This surprised me slightly. He shook my hand at the door, a fraction too firmly, and did not quite meet my eyes. Lily ran down the hallway and collided with my knees before I had my coat off. Connor watched from the doorway to the living room with the solemn evaluation of a 2-year-old encountering something he is not yet certain about. We had lunch. Brooke had made soup, not Catherine's recipe, a different one, a good one, thick with lentils and smoked sausage. Ryan talked about work. I talked about Newfoundland. Lily told me at considerable length about her skating instructor, a woman named Miss Page who apparently had very shiny hair. Connor eventually climbed onto my lap and fell asleep there with one hand gripping my sleeve, and I sat very still so as not to wake him. After lunch, Brooke put the children down for a rest. The three of us sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and I took a folded piece of paper from my jacket pocket and smoothed it out on the table between us. "I had my will updated," I said. I want to be straightforward with you about that, because you're my daughter and you deserve to know. Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. He looked at the paper and then at me. The house and most of the estate go to other arrangements, I said. The details are with my lawyer. The responds for Lily and Connor have been put into a trust that they can access when they're 25. The money is still for them, more of it, actually, because I restructured how it's invested. Brooke was looking at the table. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said. I want to be clear about that. I'm doing it because I spent a long time organizing my life around being useful to you, and I think that arrangement made both of us worse. You stopped needing to consider me, and I stopped requiring you to. That's not a relationship. That's a service. Ryan opened his mouth. Ryan, I said, not unkindly, I'd like to finish. He closed his mouth. I would like to be your father, I said to Brooke. Not your safety net, not your handyman, not someone who shows up so that you never have to wonder whether he's all right. Your father. That means I come for Christmas and you actually want me there. That means you call sometimes, not because you need anything, but because you thought of me. That means Lily and Connor grow up knowing who I am. Brooke was crying again. This time she didn't try to hide it. Can we do that? I asked. She nodded, not the nod of someone agreeing because they have no choice. Something smaller and more real than that. Ryan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I owe you an apology, Howard. I looked at him. I pushed Brooke to send that message, he said. She didn't want to. I thought, I don't know what I thought, that we needed to set some kind of limit, but I handled it badly. He exhaled through his nose. I handled it very badly. I considered that. Yes, I said. You did. Then I picked up my coffee cup, but here we are. I stayed for dinner. We ordered pizza, which Lily greeted with the enthusiasm of someone receiving excellent news. Connor had a bath, and Brooke brought him out to say goodnight in his pajamas, damp-haired and smelling of that particular soap smell that only children have, and he reached for me and I held him for a moment before handing him back. I drove home in the dark, the highway empty, the snow in the fields blue-white under the moon. I put on the radio, the station playing old country that Catherine had liked, and I drove without thinking about very much. I have seen Brooke 4 times since that November. She called me on a Tuesday in January, just to talk, no particular reason. I pretended not to notice how significant that was, and simply talked with her. We spoke for almost an hour about nothing consequential. Her garden plans for spring, a documentary I had watched, something funny Connor had said at breakfast. Lily started calling me Grandpa H, which I suspect is because she cannot always remember my last name and has found an efficient solution. I find I do not mind at all. My will remains as I wrote it, not out of stubbornness, and not as leverage, but because the version of my life I had been living, the one where I made myself indispensable, so that no one would ever leave, that version nearly cost me whatever real time I have left. Don Abernethy told me once that the purpose of a will is not to punish the living, but to reflect what a person actually values. I think about that sometimes. Last week I drove to Lethbridge to have dinner with David. He is 31, works in renewable energy, has a good laugh and a small apartment, and a dog named Biscuit, who is an extremely poor judge of personal space. We had Vietnamese food and split the bill, and I drove home through the dark Albertan prairie feeling, as I have increasingly felt since that October evening, like someone who owns his own time. That is not a small thing. I am learning that it is, in fact, everything. There is a moment, somewhere in the middle of all of this, that I keep coming back to. I am sitting in a Tim Hortons on a Tuesday night with a coffee. I am not drinking, and the man at the next table is reading a newspaper like it is the most ordinary evening in the world. And maybe it was. Maybe the extraordinary thing was simply that I finally sat still long enough to hear myself think. I spent a long time believing that love had to prove itself through usefulness, that if I kept showing up with my tools and my checkbook and my willingness to drive 4 hours without being asked, I was building something that would hold. What I was actually building was arrangement, comfortable for everyone, but hollow at the center. Brooke stopped having to choose me because I made sure she never had to. Brian never had to reckon with what I was worth because the cost of me was always invisible. That is not anyone's fault entirely, but it is a thing that happened, and things that happen have consequences. What I had to learn, and I learned it late, which I will not pretend otherwise, is that decency toward the people you love is not the same as absorbing whatever they send your way without response. Real decency, the kind that actually holds a family together over time, sometimes looks like a man sitting across a kitchen table saying, "This is what changed, and here is why, and I am telling you directly because you deserve that." Not a letter written in anger, not silence designed to punish. A conversation, honest and uncomfortable, between people who are trying. The intelligence in what I did was not in calling Janet or updating the will. It was in recognizing what I actually wanted, which took longer than any of the paperwork. I did not want revenge. I did not want Brooke to suffer. I wanted to stop organizing my life around the fear that if I asked for something real, I would find out no one was there. That is a terrifying thing to want clearly, because once you want it clearly, you have to act on it, and acting on it required something I had not practiced enough in 63 years, the willingness to hold a position when it was uncomfortable. To sit in the silence after I said what I said at that kitchen table, and not rush in to soften it, to let Brooke cry without immediately telling her everything was fine. Everything was not fine yet. It became finer gradually, because I did not pretend otherwise. Connor fell asleep on my lap that afternoon in November. One hand on my sleeve, total trust, no conditions. Children do not love you because you are useful to them. They love you because you are present and you are safe and you are theirs. Somewhere between when Brooke was Lily's age and when she sent that message in October, I had shifted from being a person to being a resource. I let that happen. I was also the one who had to stop it. I think about Catherine sometimes on the drives back from St. Albert in the dark. What she would have made of all of it. I think she would have been direct with me in the way she always was. She would have said, "Howard, you cannot love people into treating you well. You can only be honest about what you need and see who shows up." She was smarter than me in most of the ways that mattered. I am still learning how to be chosen instead of needed. Most days, it feels like the right thing to be learning.